Hello, football fans. We are live this Tuesday evening on the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page, and with the shirt, you know what today is. It is World Autism Awareness Day, so appropriate we're on the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. Before I bring in Brett and Jordan, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. See this stream, all the Big D videos. Speaking of the Big D podcast, you can check me out for your audio gurus on Spotify and Apple. So join me, the host of two Dolphin podcast gurus, host of the list for Dolphin fans, Brett and Jordan. So, guys, welcome, and maybe 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 the Dolphins will go from finning to winning this year, right?
Yeah, no, we Jordan and I joke about it all the time because the first half of last season it was awesome doing the podcast. We actually this past year is our first year doing it, and it was great the first like month. Not so great the last month or two. We there was a lot of anger and not wanting to do the podcast after that, so we got to put a whole season together.
Yeah, it's interesting as a Dolphin fan. I mean, we've been fans of the Dolphins for so long, and then starting this podcast, first half of the season, we are like, this is easy. Like it's almost like there wasn't much to talk about. We were the best team in the league. Like the stories wrote themselves. And I think that as the season drug on, you realize this was going to be more of a typical Dolphins season.
Yeah, it's like Miami with the weather. Miami's all nice and shiny when the weather's warm, but when you play in negative 72-degree weather, Miami's not built for the cold.
Yeah, but the other issue too is like every year's the joke with Dolphins fans is Chris Greer. The number one thing you have to do to get signed by the Dolphins is you have to be injury prone, and that's shown its ugly head again. So many injuries, especially on the offensive line. I feel like Teron Armstead gets the Vince Carter old nickname "half man, half a season" because it's all you're going to get from Armstead, and he's great for that half of the season. But then once you get to the backups, not much you can do.
And don't forget Jalen Phillips, or Bradley Chubb going down with season-ending injuries right before the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think it was the timing of those injuries really that made such a big impact. I mean, we were talking about Bradley Chubb. I think it was the other day, and somebody brought up Bradley Chubb being injury prone, not being able to stay healthy. And people forget he got hurt. I believe it was week 17 at Baltimore that he suffered that injury late in the game when the game was already over. Jalen Phillips injury, you chalk that up to MetLife Stadium being what it is. But I think the Bradley Chubb one, when you look back at the injuries throughout the course of the season, that's definitely the one that was the most preventable. And I think that was definitely the one that was kind of the backbreaker of the Dolphins season at that point. You went into the Buffalo game. You had a heartbreaking loss in the Buffalo game. And then at that point, there was no way it was going to carry over into the playoffs.
Yeah, and we lost Van Ginkel in the Buffalo game too, I believe.
So even later than the Chubb game. And I guess when Chubb got hurt, it was, all right, at least we have – well, when Phillips got hurt, it was at least we have Van Ginkel and Chubb. Then Chubb gets hurt, and it was at least we have Van Ginkel. And then Van Ginkel gets hurt, and we're signing guys off of the streets.
Yeah. Well, I even forgot, too, in that same game, the guy behind Van Ginkel, Cam Good,
got hurt immediately.
Punt return. So then we had no defensive pass rushers going into the playoffs. Like, I think everybody was not on the team week 18 this past year, except I think Melvin Ingram, who we signed like a week or two beforehand. But nobody was on the team that was rushing the passer in Kansas City like 2-3 weeks beforehand. That's just how bad it was.
The craziest part is that they brought back Malik Reed for the playoff game, who they cut in training camp before the season.
Yeah.
So it was just the Dolphins were as good as the early part of the season was. The late part of the season was a disaster.
Yeah.
Didn't you guys sign Justin Houston, who rumor has it played in like 1965?
He was
Justin
the
Houston.
first edge rusher.
Yeah. Justin Houston and Bruce Irvin, they both got signed for the playoffs.
I know Bruce Irvin was with the Legion of Boom in Seattle, but maybe those guys should have meant the Legion of Doom, right?
Yeah.
Oh.
So obviously we know what happened in the playoffs. I mean, Miami froze, so did half its fans. Hopefully everybody will be okay, but
And half of the Chiefs fans too, they froze.
yeah. And so I mean Miami went all in, and Dolphins, like every team, somehow got under the cap, but Christian Wilkins signed big deal with the Las Vegas Raiders. Robert Hunt signed a big deal with the Panthers. Obviously, two big time losses. But how do you think Miami's done this off season?
You want to take that, Jordan?
Yeah, I think I'll start with, I guess, the elephants in the room, so to speak, in Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt. And I think that Dolphin fans realized relatively quickly that the future of the team was going to look like it was going to kind of look now without them. I think that they definitely leave big holes. And I think that those are holes that, although we've signed some depth, you're going to see the Dolphins address in the first 2 rounds of the draft. I don't think that Dolphin fans, as much as we saw on Twitter or X or whatever, that, the Dolphins lost Robert Hunt, the Dolphins lost Christian Wilkins. I think you would have seen the same negativity and the same criticism if the Dolphins would have re-signed one of those guys at that number. So as far as they're concerned, I don't know. The one I think Dolphin fans keep going back to is not re-signing Van Ginkel. I think the number that the Vikings signed him at was a very realistic number that the Dolphins fans, I think, would have felt comfortable giving. But as far as the Dolphins offseason, they've added veterans. The thing I like the most is that the Dolphins have added multiple captains to their team. Jordan Poyer, Kendall Fuller, and there's one other that I'm miss. I think Jordan Brooks was a captain. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Anthony Walker was a special teams captain. And they're bringing in leaders. They're bringing in veterans. And I think they're going to add to those positions with good draft picks. Defensive tackle was never really a position that Anthony Weaver was used to overpaying at. Defensive tackle was never a position that Anthony Weaver was used to having a big contract at. So I think replacing Christian Wilkins with guys like Benito Jones, who they signed, with a guy like Zach Sealer, with a guy like a Byron Murphy or a Johnny Newton, who they could draft in the first, or a Coro that they could draft in the second. I think those guys could do a very adequate job. And kind of, you can't replace Christian Wilkins in one player, but I think you could do a good job from a team aspect. And I look for, although the Miami Dolphins individual pieces might not be as top heavy, I look for the team to be a lot better going into this next season.
Yeah. The thing with Christian Wilkins is it's not on, I hate to downplay this, but it's not so much on the field we're going to miss him as I think you can get good production in place of him. But even when we drafted him, he was known as a guy who was a leader. He was made to be a culture builder. So you're going to miss him in the locker room more than you are going to miss him on the field. And you're still going to miss him on the field. But we tried to extend him last year. We offered him, I think, $22 million a year. He bet on himself, and he got an insane amount of money. Robert Hunt, it's funny because Jordan and I both said we wanted to re-sign him. And at the time, like in the season, I think the top 10 paid guard would be like 11, 12 mil, which seems reasonable. But then you start hearing he was going to get 16 million. And I was like, well, I don't really think you want to give that to a right guard, especially next year when you have to look at extending Waddle, Javon Holland, and Jalen Phillips. So I was like, well,
and Tua.
Yeah, I was going to say, and we still got to extend Tua, which I think gets done this year. So it was one of those things where it's like, okay, I don't want to give him that. And then you see he gets 20 mil a year, and my jaw literally dropped because I like Robert Hunt, but he's not top paid right guard in the NFL. So that's just one of those deals I think is not going to look as kind. And that happened with a couple people. Like Raekwon Davis got a deal I was not comfortable giving him. Brandon Jones got a deal I wasn't comfortable giving him. So we're actually going to end up with a couple comp picks, which is good. But then some of the other losses, because Dolphin fans were panicking because we also let go of Xavier Howard. We let go of Jerome Baker, which I think most people were prepared for. And I think the replacements that we have coming in are probably better than who we lost in those positions. Jordan Brooks and Anthony Walker and Jordan Poirier, as well as Kendall Fuller. So when you look at where we were cap-wise to start this offseason, I think it's hard not to be happy or at least pleasantly surprised with where we are now.
Yeah, because you want to have some of these teams get out of the cap space. Like, I don't know how the Saints get out of being, $90 million in dead over the cap?
Yeah. Yeah, I have no I still don't understand exactly how the Saints keep doing it every year. That's where, like, I never believed the cap was fake, but just seeing how the Saints somehow always do it, that's where I'm like, well, maybe the cap is fake or it's just guidelines, because every year they're like 120 million over and they somehow get cap compliant in time. So I don't understand it.
Or like the Kansas City Chiefs signed Chris Jones. I'm like,
yeah.
I've heard it described to me as paying off a credit card with another credit card. You're not paying it off today in cash, but eventually you're going to owe it, and eventually you're going to have to pay it off. And the Saints are going to be a team that I think right now they're going to be very limited in the moves they can make over the next couple of years. And they're kind of stuck with this team. And you hope, because I think every team, when you start entering a window like this, you look to compete and you look to give yourself that window, and you're going to probably get into cap hell. You just got to hope that getting into cap hell aligns with when you're very good. You look at a team like the Rams, there wasn't really a long period where the Rams were horrible when they were losing picks and losing money, and now they're getting to a point where they're beginning to kind of turn that corner, and they're still relatively competitive. I think the mistake that the Dolphins have made over the course of their franchise is they've bottomed out a bunch of times, and they get in cap hell, and then it doesn't work, and they bottom out, and they're the worst team in the league for a period of time, and then they finally start bringing it up until they get in cap hell again. You hope that this core is young enough and has enough talent to where winning a Super Bowl, even going to a Super Bowl, is worth having to deal with this in the next couple of years, because it's definitely coming. There's going to be a year or two where it's very, very difficult for the Dolphins to maneuver.
well, obviously decisions are made. I mean, and seemingly quarterbacks all a franchise start. If you have a quarterback, you can win. I mean, look at what the Houston Texans did, winning the AFC South last year, or Trevor Lawrence the year before that. But obviously, Tua's the guy in Miami. Finally played a whole year without getting hurt. It's amazing what happens when the quarterback plays all 17 games. Outside, that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah. It's amazing what happens when you don't have Jesse Davis starting as one of your two tackles as well.
Why do you got to say that name, Brett?
Just pointing it out, because that's how Tua got hurt 2 years ago. Davis got beat in less than a second, and Tua ended up getting cracked ribs. So there's sometimes the offensive line we have put out in front of not just Tua, but Ryan Tannehill, people would like to call them traffic cones, but it's an insult to traffic cones. So
I think with Tua, the biggest thing, and I think me and Brett talked about this a couple of weeks ago, is before the question was, can he stay healthy? The question before anything was, can Tua stay healthy? Now, I think he showed this season that he can stay healthy and he can play well throughout the course of the regular season. Now, it's just an opportunity of going into 2024, 2025, can he win? He can stay healthy. He can play well. Now, can he win? But Dylan, the question I want to ask you, because while we're on with you, I'm currently getting messages from my producer in the back,
So am I.
who is providing me with documents that shows that very comparable numbers between Trevor Lawrence and Daniel Jones. So I want to know, as you're shaking your head there, if you could give me, and I could provide this to you if you want as well. I don't know if I could put this in the chat. I don't know if I can, but we'll get it to you. But what do you think about Trevor Lawrence? And how do you feel about the narrative that Trevor Lawrence and Daniel Jones are very comparable quarterbacks?
I think that's an insult to Daniel Jones that you put him in the same class as Trevor Lawrence, because Daniel Jones will be out in New York next year.
Wait, it's an insult to Daniel Jones or it's an insult to Trevor Lawrence?
I think it's an insult to both of them, because Daniel Jones is a backup, but yet he's getting $40 million. Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, Trevor regressed last year, but literally he played with 72 injuries from like week 6 on. I think he was on the injury report like 66 times.
Yeah, there was a point I think it was towards the end of the year, where there were a couple games, and yeah, I think your backup is CJ Beathard, but there was at least 1 or 2 games that I think the Jags ended up losing where it was very obvious that Trevor Lawrence shouldn't have been playing because he was just that banged up. I like Trevor Lawrence. I think he is a franchise guy. I just think the hype he got coming out of Clemson is almost impossible for anybody to live up to. And then with what he did in the playoffs coming back against the Chargers, I think the expectations got a little unrealistic this year as well for the team as a whole too. But what do you think he needs to do to get back to where most people think he'll be?
Simple. Trevor's got to take better care of the football. I mean, it's the Andrew Luck situation, because, I mean, Andrew Luck got to an AFC Championship game with literally no wide receivers and an ugly offensive line. Jackson's offensive line last year was, to put it mildly, bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was a below-average O-line. I mean, Travis, and I'm not just saying it because I'm a Jag fan, the offensive line was bad. Like, I don't know how many times last year Travis Etienne runs went nowhere. It frustrated the bleep out of me. I mean, Christian Kirk getting hurt the first play of that Monday night game against Cincinnati didn't help, because I think Christian Kirk was the number 1 receiver, stalling Calvin Ridley, but Trevor Lawrence loves Christian Kirk.
Do you think they need to add another receiver, let's say on day 1 of the draft, day 2 max, to go with Christian Kirk?
Oh, 100%. I mean, a lot of people think the Jaguars are going to add a wide receiver at 17. Even, whether it be Ryan Thomas or who's the kid from Oregon, Troy Franklin. But, I think Christian Kirk will be the PPR guy. He's a guy I really want in drafts. Gabe Davis will just be running 9 rounds, so he'll basically be the same guy, just warmer weather. And Zay Jones, Zay Jones wasn't really healthy last year, so getting him would at least help. Evan Ingram was great last year. We caught, over 100 balls. So, but Jackson's got to get the offensive line better, because guess what? If Trevor Lawrence is under duress, guess what? He's not going to throw picks to the other team. And as Kansas City proved last year, you have an offensive line can run the ball, guess what? Your quarterback's going to be a lot happier, because, hey, I can run the ball, get 10 yards, first down, and instead of punting the ball to the other team, hey, you got, speaking of blowing leads, the Tennessee Titans not only cost you a division, they knocked us out of the playoffs, so we both hate the Titans because of that.
Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Dylan. We were talking about your team for a second, Dylan.
That's a sore spot for Dolphins fans. But no, seriously,
because the freaking Titans knocked us out of the playoffs. We lost to Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry, who's 79 years old.
There is some Dolphins fan out there who literally got frostbite and had limbs cut off for traveling to the game when he could have gotten a game in Miami if it wasn't for Will Levis and the Titans.
So what? Then he would have faced Josh Allen again, and we know how
But
that
we would have done it at home.
We would have done it at home.
So what?
But-
You would have played Josh Allen 2 weeks in a row.
Well, at the same time, we win that game, we have the division locked up a week beforehand. So that last game,
Mike White or Skylar Thompson would have started.
and Van Ginkel probably doesn't get hurt. We get like everybody a week to rest because Jalen Waddle was banged up. Tyreek Hill was never healthy after the Titans game, so you get a week. Javon Holland would have gotten another week to get ready. So the Titans game, which Jordan can back up, is kind of my fault we lost, and he can tell that story.
You're just a jinx. That's all there is to it.
Yeah. So what happened was we were up, we got a turnover, and there was like 5 minutes left. We were up 2 scores, and I tweeted out from our Twitter. It wasn't pretty, but you learn from it. It's going to be a win. Move on to the next week. And then after that, Jaguars scored two touchdowns. So I was reminded the hard way, do not tweet until after the game is over. So I cost the Dolphins the division.
Yes, you did, Brett.
Maybe if Mike Vrabel, the 2-pointer hadn't been converted, Miami would have won the game. But
yeah, and if the hip drop was illegal this year, we would have maybe scored, and Tyreek Hill wouldn't have got injured. So everything bad just happened to us after that game, and it made for some grumpy people.
Yeah, but I do have a question for you guys. I've heard rumors the Dolphins will likely give Tua a big contract extension. Would you give Tua a big deal?
Brett, I took the last one. This one's yours.
So one of our producers, is one of the biggest Tua stands you'll ever meet, and he's like making the highest paid player in the NFL, making the highest paid player in NFL history. I wouldn't go that far. I do think Tua has earned the right, and he has showed improvement every year when he's been healthy, that he is the guy. We gave Ryan Tannehill, 7 years, and we gave him a big extension, and Tannehill never got close to showing what Tua's shown when he's been healthy. We never even when Tua hasn't been healthy, basically every year he's been with us, he has had us competing for the playoffs. Last 2 years getting in, and we only won 1 game without him when he was hurt. So I think he has shown he deserves an extension. I've seen 50 mil, 55 mil a year, and I'm fine with that because the general rule is with quarterbacks is the market tends to even itself out. So then it may look a little much to people on the outside initially, but in a year or two, it looks like a bargain. But yeah, I love Tua. I think everybody has to admit he has certain flaws that need to be improved. And it does sound like he is taking steps this offseason to improve that. Like something most people don't know, he doesn't work with a quarterback coach in the offseason. He just works with a personal trainer. This is going to be the first offseason he's reportedly going to have a quarterback coach. So I think that's going to make a big difference. He's beloved by his teammates. He is a great leader. We just got to work on some of those pre-snap read decisions to bring some of the interceptions down. But yeah, I'm all in on Tua and absolutely for giving him an extension.
Yeah, I think Brett said it perfectly. I think that you have to do it, partly because there's nobody better else out there that you can get right now, and also partly because that's what you do in the NFL today when you have a guy like Tua. I think that Chris Greer and Brandon Shore are smart enough that they'll work the contract in a way that gives the Dolphins a little bit of flexibility every year. I don't think the Dolphins will put themselves in cap hell like a team like the Saints. But I do think that there's a number that you're going to pay Tua. That's going to be a relatively significant number that you might be a little uncomfortable paying him, but you have to do it, and you have to bank on the fact, hopefully him working with John Beck and the other quarterback coaches that he's working with this offseason will help him take that next step in his development. And if he can win a playoff game in Miami, then he's well worth the contract.
Yeah. Dylan, I also want to add this. The one thing I do hate that has come up from some draft people is the narrative that the Dolphins need to just take Michael Penix now.
Horrible.
I like Michael Penix as a player. I'm sure you saw in the mock draft you helped us with, the Giants fan took him 6th overall. So there are some people who really like Michael Penix. I wouldn't do that, but I do think some people do underrate Penix a bit as a prospect. But I am not giving up on Tua for Michael Penix. I'm not giving up on Tua for Bo Nix.
Absolutely not.
So
I don't even think right now today, I don't think I give up on Tua for Drake May.
Yeah.
And I know, Brett, you wouldn't trade him for Caleb Williams. I just personally think that getting a quarterback on a rookie deal is so valuable in the NFL. But I know, Brett, that there's not and as our producer in the back is saying, Brett, Dylan, you have a better chance asking Brett what quarterback he would give up Tua for, because there aren't many of them outside of 4 or 5. And I think that answer right there, the fact that there are only 5 quarterbacks that you would no doubt give him up for, tells me that he's worth the money you're about to pay him.
Let me see if I could guess. Pat Mahomes is one of them.
That's one.
Josh Allen.
I hate to say it, but
I wouldn't.
I probably wouldn't for Josh Allen. There's a hatred there because he's a Bills. He is definitely a top 5 quarterback, but the hatred of Josh Allen from the Bills fan, it's tough to admit that you'd give up Tua for Josh Allen.
By the way, Dylan, I want you to know that while you're going through this right now, we are getting blasted in our comments right now from our producer telling us that we need to stop speaking right now, and that because this was originally the behind the scenes thing is this was really started as a Tua podcast more than it was a Dolphins podcast. And it really took, and Brett will tell you, it really took me and Brett saying, stop it. This is a Miami Dolphins podcast that we're doing about the Dolphins. This is not a Tua podcast. So us just simply even saying that we'd take Mahomes over Tua puts us in rough water with our producer.
Wait, so you sound like Dak Prescott's brother who would take Mahomes and then have Dak number 2?
That's too far for Mr. S.
Yeah. Honestly, aside, I don't think I think Tua, especially outside, like seeing how some fans outside of Miami talk about him, and even some like analysts talk about him and nationally, outside of Mahomes, like you get okay, you can maybe say Josh Allen, but I don't really think you can say many other people. I know the hot name right now is CJ Stroud, and he deserves all the praise he gets, like not taking anything away from him. But we saw Justin Herbert have a historic rookie season in the NFL, and Herbert, he's a good quarterback, arguably a great quarterback, but he hasn't won. And I think he's shown. I think more questions start popping up for Herbert every year to see what you can actually win with him, while Tua's answering a lot of questions that I don't think have always been fair. I'm not saying that's going to happen with Stroud, because I actually do really like Stroud a lot, but we can't be crowning someone after a great rookie year. We need to see how it goes. But yeah, outside of Mahomes, I think it's very difficult to come up with concrete people I would take over Tua.
I would take Mahomes. I would take Lamar Jackson, and I would take Joe Burrow. But that's just me. I like Burrow.
Burrow is another one that I would probably, but he has bigger injury issues than Tua.
Well, yeah, because Cincinnati's offensive line couldn't protect Santa's sleigh.
Yeah. You're right.
And Dylan, just so you know, you're getting me in hot water because I just received a message that said Tua's in the top 2 with Mahomes, and he ain't number 2.
No, I've got actually. You know what? I might be in hot water for what I'm about to say. Tua's about 13 to 15 in my range. Of course.
Boy.
I do not agree with that. I do not agree with that.
It's not whether I agree or not. Contractually, I'm not allowed to say whether I agree with that or not.
Yeah.
Because right here, there is totally not a gun to my head. Yeah, I think I think you're getting us in some hot water here, saying that Tua's 13 to 15.
Well, I mean, I'm coming from a neutral point of view, unlike your biased point of view.
So now, Dylan, let me ask you this: are you saying if this is an NFL draft, the league is starting over, and you're drafting from number 1, there are 13 to 15 guys you'd start your franchise with before Tua? Or is it if you had to win a game today, one game, there are 13 to 15 guys you would take ahead of Tua to win a game?
Quarterback-wise, Tua in that 13, 14, 15 range.
I just received a message that says, and I quote, counterpoint, and then the same image of Daniel Jones and Trevor Lawrence that I referenced earlier in the show.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
Wait a minute. Daniel Jones has got more playoff wins than Tua.
Daniel Jones also has a better career passer rating than Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, wait till Trevor Lawrence gets $55 million a year.
That'll be the day.
And then
what did Daniel Jones get? He had to get it somewhere in the 30s or 40s.
I think 40.
Jesus. Ugh. That's too much.
I don't think Brian Dable even wants to play him, but yet the Giants has Eli Manning.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the mock draft, you guys did a mock draft first round involving all 32 picks, which I was a part of. I did the Jaguar pick. Do you have a recap of like some of the picks? I mean, obviously one was the Bears guy took Caleb Williams. Who was 2?
Jaden Daniels went
2. And Drake May went 3. Quarterback-wise, Michael Penix went 6. I'm sorry. J.J. McCarthy went – Michael Penix went 1st. Penix went 6. J.J. McCarthy went 11. And that mock draft can be found on listpodcast.com. It can also be found on our social media channels where we have both the podcast up of the audio version of the mock draft and then the text version of it that you can see all the picks. But
and we are slowly, especially for anybody who did the picks on StreamYard, we are slowly releasing the picks onto Twitter as well. So Dylan, your pick is going to be one of the ones that will be released on Twitter as well once we get that ready, since we did it through StreamYard.
And you guys, were you guys ultimately surprised with who I took?
Not really, because you had joined us in Discord and you had said that the Raiders had taken the player you wanted, Mitchell, out of Toledo, the cornerback. So I figured you might go corner. And this is an interesting corner class because I think we talked about it on our podcast, Dylan. Aside from Mitchell, it seems like everybody has differing opinions on the corners. So I thought you could go wide receiver just because Mitchell was gone. But I wasn't surprised you took Arnold. I think we actually had that in our R1 podcast as well.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we had the Jags take a defensive back. But the thing I found interesting, more so than just simply you passing on Brian Thomas, was that a lot of people passed on Brian Thomas. He's the type of guy that I don't necessarily see getting all the way to 28. But then you say that, and I know this was the pushback I gave Brett and our producers in the back when they brought up Graham Barton not getting picked in the first round. And I said, like, we can sit here and say Graham Barton's a first rounder. He's definitely a first rounder. Well, we just did an exercise where we took 32 unbiased opinions from different teams, able to pick their favorite player, and none of them picked Graham Barton. So now you say, all right, you put Graham Barton in there, and you say, all right, which of these first round guys are you going to take out? Is Kool-Aid McKinstry not a first round guy? Is Nate Wiggins, is Chop Robinson not a first round guy? And you run into these same conversations. So this draft is so interesting to me because from about 11 or 12 to about 40, outside of the quarterbacks, there are a lot of guys that I think are really bunched up in the same area, which is why, like I said to you before we came on, or I said at the beginning, I don't remember, that I really think a trade down would be beneficial to the Dolphins because they'd still get a guy in that same tier. But I did think, to loop it back around, because I do like to talk in circles, I do think that it was a little surprising you took Brian Thomas, but defensive back is also such a big need for the Jaguars that it made sense.
Yeah.
I mean, if Owen wouldn't have been there, I may have said, can I trade back? But unfortunately, we couldn't trade back.
Yeah, that was the most common question.
And it was asked a lot. This took us, Dylan, about 12 and a half hours of record time. And it is still being edited over the course of it's now been 4 or 5 days. So I can only imagine if we also factored trades in there, it would have been, as much as we would have loved to do it, I might have gotten murdered behind the scenes if I would have allowed trades to go through.
Who did the Dolphins guy take at 21?
J.C. Latham.
The lineman from Alabama.
Yeah, he is someone that I haven't really focused on for the Dolphins. But Ghost of Adam Gase, who made the pick, he's big on Dolphins Twitter. He gave a good explanation. He said you draft him, he's played guard before. You get your plug-and-play left guard for this year, and then Armstead is probably gone after the season, and you just move Latham over to left tackle. And the more I think about it, if the Dolphins do go offensive line in the first round, I think they are going to be probably taking that strategy of you get someone with the goal of playing them at guard this year, but ultimately kicking them out as Armstead's replacement in 2025.
I mean, could the Dolphins go tackle? I mean, this is a great offensive line draft. I mean, there could be a dozen, 13, 14 linemen in the first 2 rounds.
Yeah, I think you could take a tackle, but I think when you start looking at specifically Amarius Mims in the conversation, if the Dolphins take a tackle, you have to take a guy that can also play guard for a year. Because I don't think the Dolphins can afford to take a guy at 21 that's not going to have a clear-cut starting position this upcoming season. I think the Dolphins are too much in their window of competing to take a guy at 21 or even at 55, honestly, and say, oh, we're projecting this guy to be our left tackle next season. In order for the Dolphins, I think, to take a guy at either 21 or 55, it has to be, all right, this guy has a clear path to start now, and then the year after, okay, we can fit him into where we need to fit him in, but he needs to be able to start training camp day one at a position.
Yeah, agreed.
Especially because Austin Jackson's still on the right side, gave him a big deal. So, trying to think, I mean, could the Dolphins take one of the interior linemen, the interior lineman from Oregon, the lineman from Duke? I mean, or maybe
I think that's likely your most likely scenario.
Yeah. Well, it came out that the center from Oregon, Powers Jackson, has admitted that he is a Dolphins fan. So early on, he is the guy that Dolphins Twitter fell in love with. But as more comes out, center is such an important position, but people don't want to invest in it in the draft. So I think he is the one guy. he's probably one of the more talented offensive linemen in the draft class, but he's probably going to fall down just because he's a center. But then you look at Graham Barton, who, while we're doing the mock draft last week, just destroys it at his pro day. And he's getting pushed up. And many people think he can play all 5 positions, so Barton can get pushed up. But then you talk about the tackles. People would love Troy Fuatanu. He's not going to be there. The Oregon State tackle, Fuega, he's not going to be there. If either of them are there, you run up the card and you take them. But is a Jordan Morgan worth taking at 21 for us? Or is he compared to Powers Jackson or Barton? Powers Johnson, excuse me. So there's some interesting questions. And I actually think the only way we don't take offensive line, wide receiver could make it interesting, but Byron Murphy from Texas, a D tackle. If he's there, I think he might be the pick.
Yeah, I think Byron Murphy, I think Jerzon Newton both make a lot of sense. And I think, Brett, to your point, and Dylan, to your point, this offensive line draft is so deep. And I think the area the Dolphins are really looking to plug and play an offensive lineman is at guard. So I do think there's a chance they look to add a Connor Beebe, a Christian Haynes, a Zach Zinter at 55 rather than adding a Graham Barton at 21. And then you end up with either a defensive tackle or a receiver at 21. And then you go ahead and plug and play that guard with the 55th pick of the draft.
Is there a chance the Dolphins could trade back? You don't have a 3rd or 4th round pick.
I hope so. If an opportunity comes to trade back, I think that 85 to 90% of Dolphin fans will tell you that's the best course of action.
Yeah. With how this wide receiver class is, like if the draft went anything like our mock draft, if Brian Thomas is there at 21, do we consider him? Maybe. But you start taking those phone calls if he's there. People come up and get him. Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell. So with this wide receiver class how it is, I think that can change some stuff either. But ideally, I think all Dolphin fans would love to trade back and get another pick or two.
Does Brock Bowers name ring?
I'd be shocked if he was there, but I don't think any Dolphin fan would hate Brock Bowers.
I think early on in the process, Dolphin fans, myself included, said we don't even want to talk about Brock Bowers.
Yeah.
Don't say the name Brock Bowers just because he's not going to be there. So it's out of sight, out of mind. And we did sign a couple tight ends in free agency. But I think if Brock Bowers is there, you take him immediately. But I do think he's going to go off the board 10 to the Jets if everything continues on this path.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you guys see the draft going in general? Obviously, Caleb Williams is going 1, but who are you guys seeing the Commanders take at 2? Because it's going to be between 1 or 2 guys, we think. It's either going to be Jaden Daniels or Drake May. Who do you guys see the Commanders taking at 2?
It's a conversation we've had a lot because I am going to give Jordan and me credit for this because I swear we were the first ones on Jane Daniels above
For sure. There is no doubt in my mind that we were the first 2 people that said not only that he's a top pick, that he's a first round pick. Nobody was even on the first round grade.
I've got a guy who was on my show in December and he said, "Look out, Jane Daniels for a draft." I think
we might have had it before.
Yeah. We started talking about him in October because we would do Heisman like favorites every week, and we were talking about Jaden Daniels, and then we started being like, "Hey, is Jaden Daniels a first-round pick?" So I definitely think Jordan and I were the first 2 on him. I think Daniels is going second. What I think is going to be interesting is third for various reasons, because also there's rumor that the Vikings are going to trade up. But the two quarterbacks you're hearing a lot about are Drake May, who I feel there's prospect fatigue on, because Drake May for so long was the number 2 guy behind Caleb Williams. I think he disappointed a bit this year. And then J.J. McCarthy, who I'm a Michigan fan, but admittedly he did not have, like, if you look at his stats, he didn't have the greatest year.
He didn't throw the ball the second half against Penn State.
Yes, no, he didn't. But he has all the intangibles you look for. And he's clearly, I can say this as a Michigan fan, he's not ready to start next year, but the intangibles people love. I think what's going to be interesting is if the rumors of how much the NFL loves J.J. McCarthy are true, and if he is either going to be the number 3 pick, the surprising number 3 pick over Drake May, or if teams are trying to trade up in front of the Giants to get J.J. McCarthy at 4. Because there is a very realistic possibility, especially like if the Vikings trade up, quarterbacks could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I don't. Well, Bo Nix or Michael Penix won't go 5. I mean, maybe to 12.
Well, they went. Michael Penix went pretty high in our. Well, not 5. Sorry, because of the Chargers, but 5 quarterbacks in the top 6. There's a realistic possibility that could happen. And now Vegas is saying that Bo Nix might be the favorite to go to Denver in the first round too. So
Bo Nix would fit. Bo Nix would be really good in Sean Payne's offense because he'd be Drew Brees 2.0.
I don't know about that. Bo Nix is
the hope. If you're taking him, that's why you're taking him.
Yeah. The other thing aside from quarterback I'm looking for is in a lot of ways I think the draft, if Drake May goes 3, I think the draft does start with the Chargers because I think they clearly would like to trade down. But do they go receiver? Do they go Joe Alt?
Honestly, if the Chargers stay at 5, I think they take Joe Alt because Jim Harbaugh wants physicality, and Joe Alt's the best lineman in this draft. But LA's not. I don't think LA's staying at 5. The Chargers have got 6 needs. Other than quarterback and pass rusher, the Chargers need everything. I mean, they need a wide receiver. They need another lineman. They need defensive tackles. They need tight ends. They need corners. The Chargers can't get that at 5. So, I mean, if the draft went some version of Caleb, Drake May, Jane Daniels, or reverse, and then Arizona at 4, surprisingly, takes Marvin Harrison Jr., the Chargers could be sitting on a potential sweet spot because guess what team's got 2 first-round picks? 11 and 23.
Yeah, Minnesota Vikings.
It makes a ton of sense. I think the Chargers are going to wait. And I think it really depends on, to me, what happens with Marvin Harrison. If the Vikings trade up to 4 and take a quarterback and Harrison's there, I think the Chargers take him and move on and add Marvin Harrison to Justin Herbert and move on. And I think if Harrison goes 4, which means the Cardinals didn't trade down, then I think a team gets a call from the Chargers kind of seeing what they think about moving up. And it might not even be a team for a quarterback. It might be a team, Atlanta at 8, Chicago at 9, the Jets at 10, a team like that wants to move up and potentially get a receiver and let the Chargers come back down and get a player in the back half of the top 10.
Why would the Falcons want to get a wide receiver? They need pass rush.
You and I know they need pass rush. They needed pass rush last year, and they took a running back. They needed pass rush the year before, and I think the year before was the tight end. The year before that was the receiver. So the Falcons like luxury cars in the first round.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, the Jets, but the Jets don't have a second-round pick. So what are the Jets giving up? A 1 next year?
Seems like a Jets move to make.
Yeah, you got a GM and a coach that are on the hot seat. They're going to make, as we saw in Chicago before when they traded up for Justin Fields. Desperate teams do desperate things. So,
but the Bears don't have a second-round pick either.
True, but it's more of an example because what you're going to see is there is going to end up being a team that is going to that's going to get desperate, and it's just to see which team is going to be that. So the key there is what coaches are on the hot seat and what elite player is going a little later than's expected. And then at that point, you'll see who's going to take that big risk and move up. And 9 times out of 10, they end up costing themselves their jobs doing that. But it is going to happen. It happens every year.
What team's going to be the most intriguing on draft night?
Honestly, I'd say.
I really think. Sorry, Brad. I think the draft really starts with the Giants because I think that Chicago, Washington, New England are taking quarterbacks. I think Arizona's either taking a receiver or trading down. I think the Chargers are taking a receiver, an offensive lineman, or trading down. But the Giants could go a number of different ways. And if the Giants don't take a quarterback, then you start seeing guys slip to 11. Vikings are definitely going to take one. Now, do the Vikings and Broncos get J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix? Or are they taking whoever's left out of those two, and a guy like Bo Nix is jumping up into the top 15? And if a guy like Bo Nix jumps in the top 15, I think teams like the Jaguars, teams like the Dolphins start seeing their boards match up very nicely and better players coming down. But if the Giants pass on a quarterback and let's say J.J. McCarthy goes 11, Michael Penix goes 12 to Denver, I think there's a chance that Bo Nix doesn't get picked for the rest of the first round.
You could end up being Will Levis, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
And I see a team like the Broncos or a team like the Raiders or a team like the Seahawks or a team like the Rams being a fit for a quarterback, but in the second round, not necessarily in the first round. A lot like Will Levis last year, a lot like Malik Willis the year before that. So I think that what the Giants do, I think will dictate a lot of the first round, and I think will also dictate how much money Bo Nix is going to make on draft night. Because if the Giants take a quarterback or the Vikings trade up for a quarterback, I think both of those scenarios make Bo Nix a decent amount of money.
Yeah.
Which team do you see as the most intriguing, Brett?
Honestly, I would say to go back, I know Jordan said the Giants, and if they take quarterback, that is basically going to dictate most of the round. But I think it's the Chargers, all because of Jim Harbaugh. You don't know what he's going to do.
Homer.
Homer. But everybody's expecting either wide receiver or offensive tackle. But to go back to when he was with the Niners, everybody was talking about them taking Blaine Gabbert, and he took a pass rusher. Not saying they're going to do that because they have Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa, but Jim Harbaugh, going back to San Francisco, has a history of going off the beaten trail for his draft picks. So I would not be shocked if they really do something different. And the one rumor I'm seeing is everybody's talking Joe Alt. There are rumors that Harbaugh has Fuega from Oregon State as the number one offensive tackle.
Which I think would make sense in a situation that Harbaugh trades down, a lot like the Bears did last year with Darnell Wright. You could see Harbaugh trading into that late top 10 or just outside of the top 10 to a spot like 11 and taking a guy like Fuaga right outside the top 10, more so where he's slotted.
Yeah.
And he would actually make a lot of sense because then you wouldn't have to move Rashawn Slater. You just play him at a guard spot in year one. And then because Pipkins is still under contract for another year, once you get rid of Pipkins, you can put Fuaga either at right tackle or add somebody at that point.
Yeah. But yeah, I just think with Harbaugh, the Chargers are going to be a team not to do something desperate. They're just going to do something that everybody's going to not see coming.
You know what team is intriguing to me? The Seattle Seahawks.
The Dolphins?
You played the Seahawks this year.
We do. The Seahawks are interesting too, because despite the moves they made.
Here's why. Seattle can get out of Geno Smith's contract after this year. Brought in Sam Howell. But I don't think either one of those guys is a long-term answer. Seattle's offensive coordinator, coach Michael Penix Jr. at Indiana and Washington. I'm just saying, if Penix is there at 16, it would not surprise me, even though the Seattle Seahawks probably need an offensive lineman, if we hear Commissioner Goodell say, with the 16th pick in the 2024 NFL Draft, the Seattle Seahawks take Michael Penix, quarterback, Washington.
Yeah, that would not shock me either.
I definitely think it's possible. And Brett and I talked about that Penix and Grubb connection. I think that the Seahawks getting Sam Howell has nothing to do with Michael Penix. I think, like you said about Dylan, about the Geno Smith contract, I think that has more to do with the Michael Penix situation. But when I look at the connection between Seattle to Washington and Seattle to Grubb, the name I keep going back to is Troy Fautanu, the offensive lineman. I think he would be a fantastic fit. And I would almost be willing to bet that if Fautanu is there at 16, that he's going to end up being a Seahawk.
You wouldn't have to move.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially because isn't the right tackle dealing with a bulky knee?
You're not wrong.
Yeah.
All right, so I mean, in 23 days, we're all going to be rumbling, fumbling, and stumbling in Detroit, right?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, the Dolphins mania is going to be tweeting, "We hate this pick. We love this pick. We hate this pick. This guy sucks."
Yeah, I think that's what Dolphin fans do best.
Hey, at least you have a first-round pick.
Finally.
Yeah.
Finally.
The commissioner stole one of your picks, but
Yeah. We don't talk about that.
All right, fellas, thanks for hopping on. We've got to talk this year because the Dolphins and Jags are playing at Hard Rock Stadium this year, so maybe we'll have you on that week because hopefully our quarterbacks stay upright this year.
Yeah.
I hope so. Dylan, I really